This is Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony on FM 92.7 and AM 1400. The Answer.
Good morning, Detroit. Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony. If you missed that first hour, head over to theanswerdetroit.com. That's theanswerdetroit.com. There's a lot of stuff that's happening outside of what, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Joining us today is Jace White. He's the Director of Federal Legislation for the National Right to Work Committee, one of the nation's most effective organizations fighting against forced unionism and the unchecked power of union bosses. Jace works on the front lines in Washington, battling to protect workers' freedom, taxpayers' interests, and in this case, even America's national defense. Right now, the U.S. House is preparing for a vote that could dismantle President Trump's executive order, which stripped union bosses of their power over the Department, not Defense, the Department of War. What many have called the department at stake is whether unelected labor leaders will gain leverage over military operations, defense readiness, and ultimately America's national security. Jace is here to break this down for us. Jace, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Jace, can you explain exactly what President Trump's executive order did to shield the Department of War from union boss control and why it was so significant?
That's right. An executive order issued back in March that ended the union bargaining agreements for about 75% of the currently unionized federal workforce, and that includes a lot of people who work for what was then called the Department of Defense. That's a good decision for a variety of reasons because these government unions have been doing everything that they can to try to prevent further attempts to make the federal government more efficient. Wow.
Now, the House is preparing to vote on repealing this protection. What's at stake if Congress succeeds? And who's leading on this charge?
Yeah, that's right. So the Congress needs to pass a bill to fund the military, and they've done that in a bill called the National Defense Authorization Act. The House-passed version of that bill, which passed last week, contains language that would nullify that executive order, and so it would protect the union bosses and stop what President Trump has been trying to do. That's as something that was inserted in committee very quietly into this 1,200-page bill with the help of every Democrat and unfortunately 3 Republicans as well, who are more interested in protecting the government unions than they are in standing up for President Trump and his efforts to reform the federal government.
I'm shocked that even the speaker would have even allowed something like this to proceed. So how do union demands or collective bargaining agreements threaten military readiness and national security?
Yeah, they're a big threat, in part because government unions are spending a lot of their time protecting some of the worst employees. We had a really crazy example in the VA where a nurse there several years ago was checking in on psychiatric patients and marking them present. A person, turns out, had actually escaped the facility, and he had marked that patient present 4 times before this very high-risk person was eventually discovered to be missing. Fortunately, he was okay, but VA management moved to fire that employee, and the American Federation of Government Employees said that he deserved not to be fired, but instead to get a 1-day suspension. And so when you multiply that out over the entire government, you are making it difficult for the elected officials and their appointees who run these agencies to ensure that they operate efficiently. Instead, they have to negotiate over the operations of the federal government with these unelected union officials who have their own political agenda. And this ends up being a very undemocratic thing. You have somebody who never has to face any reelection, and these union bosses who gets a significant amount of leverage over how the government operates.
Jace, are there any historical examples where union control or strikes have weakened America's defense posture?
Well, I don't know that we've seen major strikes in the Department of Defense, but it's certainly something where we don't want this kind of inefficient union bargaining getting in the way potentially of our readiness and our national defense. Another example is just the extreme cost of it. I think the last time I was on with you, we talked about official time, which is this practice where these employees who are on the clock at their federal jobs are being paid to do business for the union. This is costing us hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and that includes money that could otherwise be going to our defense budget.
Wow. Are there any members of Congress on either side of the aisle that are standing strong to protect this Trump-era executive order?
There are, and I think that the vast majority, especially of your House Republicans, are not going to put up with these efforts to nullify President Trump's executive order. We saw one of our allies in Bob Onder of Missouri who introduced an amendment to remove this language from the House version of the NDAA. Ultimately, his amendment didn't get considered, but the Senate version of the bill that funds the Department of Defense doesn't include this anti-executive order language. And so when these bills eventually go to a conference committee and the final version is produced, we're going to be strongly advocating that they don't include that language that gets rid of Trump's executive order at the military.
Now, Jace, I mean, there are some broader implications here. If unions can gain control, this level of control over the Department of War, what precedent does that set for other federal agencies? I mean, are the members of Congress looking at that? I mean, we're just talking about the Department of War, but there are other federal agencies that could be that this bill, if this language is pushed through, they'll be touched by it as well. Correct?
That's right. I mean, unfortunately, these unions are already in existence across the federal government, and they're now resisting Trump's efforts to crack down on them. But yes, there's a completely separate legislative effort that's approaching the number of votes that it needs to get onto the House floor that would nullify Trump's entire executive order. So not just the part that applies to the Department of War, but to the entire 75% of federal unions that he took on with his executive order back in March. So it just shows you that these government unions do have a lot of political power. Of course, a lot of that is power that they have as a result of us giving it to them through their ability to lobby Congress while they're on the clock at their federal jobs.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Jace White. He's the director of federal legislation for the National Right to Work Committee. You know, I just... How could this impact taxpayers? Well, you know, others who are listening to the show, who are already shouldering the cost of these bloated federal contracts and bureaucracy?
That's right. We don't want to have government agencies that have a union boss that's deciding how they operate. They're protecting a lot of the worst employees. They're increasing the costs through things like official time, and all of that makes it more expensive for us as taxpayers to have a federal government. And they're also just resisting any type of change. Trump has done a lot of things to try to reduce and downsize different federal agencies, and all of that has been protested to death by a lot of these government unions. The American Federation of Government Employees, you can find pictures of them marching up and down the D.C. Capitol Mall, arguing that Trump shouldn't be doing what he's doing through DOGE and other efforts to close and make more efficient these government agencies.
It's almost as if you knew what my next question would be, because when you think about it, would this repeal undermine what some of the work that DOGE has done and President Trump's, his broader effort to drain these entrenched bureaucracies and also to restore accountability in government? If this goes through, it undermines all of that, correct?
That's right. I mean, this is an effort. The unions are on the front lines of trying to resist what is being done to change the way that the federal government operates. They don't want there to be fewer employees because that means fewer people potentially paying dues to these government unions. And that's a big part of their revenue. That's entirely what their revenue source is. And so they don't want to see any agency have fewer employees than it once did, even if those employees are no longer necessary, no longer doing the jobs, even if they're supposed to be doing a job and they're not doing it, they want that person to remain on the payroll because that person will be kicking money back up to the union.
Yeah.
So it makes sense why it's in the union's interest to do this, but it's certainly not in the interest of us as taxpayers and citizens.
So what can taxpayers do right now to push back against this move in Congress? What should we be doing now, right now, at this moment?
Well, it's important to pay attention to what your elected officials are doing, even on these minor things like voting on the bill to fund the Department of War. I mean, you have these three Republicans, Derek Van Orden from Wisconsin, Mike Turner from Ohio, and John Bacon in Nebraska, who, although they have Republican next to their name, actually voted with the Democrats and with the union bosses to try to undermine what Trump is doing. You definitely don't want to see that, and it's something that people need to be paying attention to.
Now, how urgent is this vote? Is this something that's coming up soon? And what are the next steps if the House succeeds in dismantling the executive order?
That's right. Well, the House's version of the bill to fund the Department of War has this language and will remove President Trump's executive order. The Senate version does not. And so the next step is what's called a conference committee, where the House and Senate versions are brought together, reconciled, and turned into a single bill. That's going to be overseen by the leadership in the House and the Senate. The deadline for that is going to be September 30th. And so in the next couple of weeks, we and our supporters are going to be advocating that this language get removed, and so that the bill that gets put on President Trump's desk doesn't nullify one of his own executive orders.
Yeah, Jace White, do you guys have anywhere on your website where if somebody goes to your website, they can send a message to their elected official, or are there some elected officials you want people to particularly reach out to, and can they find that anywhere on your website?
Well, they should definitely go to our website, which is nrtwc.org. You can contact your members of Congress about all types of right-to-work issues, and we'll put some information up there about this issue of the National Defense Authorization Act.
Yeah, Jace, finally, if this battle is lost, what will be the long-term consequences for America's security, workforce, and freedom from forced unionism?
Well, it's only going to make forced unionism more powerful if we can't take on these government union bosses, and ultimately it's going to make our operations of our federal agencies more expensive. That includes the Department of Defense, and that means that we'll be less able to defend our country. We really want to take on these government union bosses, and Trump has done that, and we don't want our Congress to prevent him from being able to enact these things that he's done.
Oh, you hear my exhaustion in my voice. I'm just exhausted with everything that's going on, Jace. Finally, what's your take on what happened to Charlie? Where are we, Jace?
It's really sad to see. I mean, I'm a younger person that grew up watching Charlie Kirk and being around campus turning point chapters. He reminds me of myself in a lot of ways, and it's very scary just to see that this is what some people believe you deserve to experience if you have political opinions that they don't like.
Are you ever concerned, working at National Right to Work Committee, especially of your own safety sometimes?
You know, we do our best, and I think it's important to be fighting on these issues even when people disagree with you, and it's something that comes with the territory, but not something that it's nice to see happen to anybody, especially Charlie Kirk.
Well, Jace White, you be safe. He's the director of the federal legislation for the National Right to Work Committee. Thank you so much for joining us on Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thank you so much.
All right. You're listening to Detroit's Morning Answer. We'll be right back.